or it records off front? Okay, great. All right, good afternoon. It is Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, and this is a meeting of the Policy Committee of Western Joint School District Number 1. Present, we have three board members, John Donaldson, Chris Swigert, Dr. Chad Timan, two members of administration. Why don't you introduce yourself, administration?
Superintendent Jen Wimmer.
Director of Human Resources, Lenny Hansen.
Director of Student Services, Emily Melstrom.
Great, thank you. All right, and we traditionally begin with our Pledge of Allegiance. So why don't we rise for the pledge? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, everyone. We have a number of discussion items, and we are going to start with the Title IX administrative reg, if I remember correctly. And who's going to lead us through that discussion?
So we have several policies that govern discrimination. Most of those are required by the law for the board to have. Policy 113 governs a whole wide number of anti-discrimination rules, including rules related to Title IX, which pertains to sexual harassment or sexual discrimination. So we already have a really sound policy for Policy 113. That is the language that is recommended by Wisconsin Association of School Boards. That's been in place now for some time. WASB, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, recommends having an AR or administrative rule to accompany Policy 113 regarding Title IX specifically. And the reason for that is the process for how a Title IX complaint would be handled is quite complex based upon federal law. There's been a lot of federal rules that came out about that back in 2018 and then through 2020. There's a lot of different timelines and process pieces and rights that are included in that process. And therefore, while you're not required to have your entire process in policy, it's recommended to have an administrative rule that lays it out for you. So we got the recommended AR from WASB. Ms. Melstrom and myself spent quite a bit of time going through it. You can see it's more than 20 pages long, ensuring that it was in line with the way complaints and things like that are handled as from our district's perspective. We went through, vetted that, and then are wrapping that up to bring forward for feedback and informational purposes to the board. As you know, administrative rules are not actually policies, so you don't have to go through the entire adoption process. It's more a process of us notifying you of this is a protocol we'd like to follow. If there's no feedback or changes recommended at all, we would just go forward with immediate implementation of this as our process for handling any Title IX complaints should they arise.
So this is more of a process discussion, that makes sense. Is there anything in here that would have, you commented on this before, but I'm just confirming, anything in here that would dramatically changed the way that you would have handled these in the past? I mean, any surprises or any, we're gonna change something more drastically, or is it largely consistent with, I'm guessing we haven't had many of these. I'm hoping that we haven't had many.
Correct.
Is there anything here as it relates to the intent of how you would have handled these that would change?
You're correct that these are not complaints that come around very often. And really, we would have to follow this process regardless whether we formally have this AR or not, because the federal rules are so specific around you must wait this many days before this step, and then give this many days, and then this step. This just captures all of those into one spot so that whether it's myself, Ms. Melstrom, or future directors who are overseeing this process to ensure it's clean and organized and also publicly visible, right? This appears on the website so that anybody who would be a participant in such a process would be able to see that process in a transparent manner as well.
Go ahead.
This applies to staff and students. This any incident in our school district this would cover?
Yep, per federal law, Title IX pertains to staff or students.
Okay. And I'm assuming that this document has been vetted through the legal department as primary
So
person.
WASB's legal counsel actually wrote the document. They have a few spots where they say, you know, you want to analyze this in the context of your district, and that's where Ms. Melstrom and I worked with WASB and said, well, here's our thoughts, and they gave us feedback to make
Okay.
sure that we aligned it with practices we have here.
Sounds good.
And this is, just to clarify, I mean, Title IX is specific to education programs, correct?
Title IX applies to K-12 and post K-12
But
education.
it's like, it's specific to education, like, so it's written specific for the education environment.
For an educational organization, so it's not just in a learning environment, so like, let's say there was a sports
Yeah.
athletic interaction, but you're right, this is really representative of our process in an educational organization versus a business, as you were saying.
Yeah, and yeah, and it's just an AR, so it's not really any changes to the actual policy, so.
Correct.
It's just, I would assume, kind of just a better outline for the process.
Exactly.
Kind of a more public
Gives
flow
that
chart of the
clarity.
process that's
Yes.
followed.
And, yes.
No, I think it's a good idea, because sometimes when you have these, you know, waiting periods or time limitations, if someone's going through the process, it's good for them to know, look, this is the process, it's not that we're singling out anybody, this is the process. And so, I applaud the idea of having it publicly available, and, John, like you were saying, it's not an amendment to our policy, so it's more of a declaration of the process and procedure we would use. That being said, you know, I've certainly gotten some feedback and some questions here. The idea is there are really no objections at the policy committee level. Is it your thought we bring this to the board, or is it this is sufficient? Because it's not, we wouldn't be asking the board really to take any action. I don't want to necessarily withhold it from them, but it would be informational only, because, correct? What's administration's recommendation on that? Next steps?
You could really go either way with that. We can advise the board, put out a note that this is policy committee heard this, we're ready and confident in doing that, ask board members, you know, would you like us to schedule this on a future agenda for discussion or review? Otherwise, we can confidently move forward. I can ask the other board members what they would like to see.
Sure.
You could just put it in your
I was just-
board policy report.
I was thinking the
I
same.
mean, it's informational.
Yeah, maybe in the policy report, we can attach it, and I'll refer to it and say, here's what it is, and we talked about this. It's not something that really is a policy, so we're not bringing it forward for board action, but for transparency's sake. And if anyone had concerns, they can raise them. If you're okay with that approach?
Yes, we can do that easily, and then, again, we're not bound by all those meetings and rules, so we can easily clear that conversation and then put it into play
Right.
following that.
Right.
Mhm.
Excellent. Any other questions or items regarding Title IX? Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much.
Good chat. Thank you.
It was a lot of work that
That's right.
they put into it, so thank you.
And is this a public meeting? You can stay for all of it?
Or, I like how there's zero
Well,
hesitation,
that's easy.
right?
So,
On one of the
Give
most-
my seat to Mr. Harder.
The most gorgeous days in November that there is.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Next on our agenda is review policy language related to metal detector use. And you have in the notes, thank you, Superintendent Wimmer, that this is a follow-up discussion to an earlier board discussion.
Yep, so this was a board discussion, we had just, again, it's been a while since we met. We had an August meeting, an interim meeting that was canceled, and now we're kind of just picking up and cleaning up some loose ends with this first meeting. And then we've got a consistent meeting schedule going forward. So this was born from a board discussion, and then we started talking about what would, we had a policy discussion around what would that be, and then Tim went out and did some investigation on that from kind of the technology and facilities standpoint, and then here to share and give samples so that we can have a continued discussion, if you will, to say, okay, which direction would we like to take with that? So I'll let Tim.
Okay, so the packet that's in there, the example policies are ones that we had referenced when we had met the previous time in May. Some of the additional work that I've been doing is kind of going out and seeing how other districts are actually using metal detectors and where. So the first initial conversation really started with student searches. We believe student has something on them, we want to be able to wand them, that type of thing. And so really, the work has been around, what I'm finding is really it's student searches, it's visitors, or anybody who enters a building, very much like when we have our Raptor system here. So the Madison policy references that explicitly of, we put metal detectors at the door, every student, every visitor, parent, doesn't matter who it is who enters the building goes through that. And then the third area that has popped up lately in the news has been the use of metal detectors at sporting events or music events in your evening hours. And so actually just following some news things that happened this fall, you saw some school districts utilizing that more and making it more public. After reviewing the policies in here, and this is just a Tim thought and a thought of moving forward is the Madison policy is quite extensive and would require every time a little changes is to come back and come to the board to go through that policy review process. The wondering that I have is we create a policy that's a combination of the Racine and Oshkosh policies that overarchingly talks about those three areas around the use of metal detectors, and then we write an appropriate AR for each one of those and what the process would look like. So if we were to conduct a student search, this is what that process would look like. If we were to utilize them for entrances, for all entrances in our buildings, or we would say we're gonna do this at Badger Middle School or the high school or Silverbrook for 2 weeks, this is what that would look like. It would include notifications, all of those pieces around, the person's ability to ask, can I have somebody who searches, who's the same gender, or, what does that mean if all of a sudden it beeps, what is the next step? And then also a section on utilizing security wanding at district events and after hours. And so then both would be brought back to this committee for review and then go through there. So that's kind of my thoughts after doing some additional research of kind of combining that. And then really giving that AR and getting very detailed in the step-by-step pieces in the AR of how we would do each one of those so that it's very much the same exact process, no matter if John, Chris, Chad, Jen, or Tim pick up and do this process and who we train. So those are my thoughts and looking for some feedback, and then both would come back through the AR and the policy at the same time.
I have some initial thoughts, others need to always jump in first. I like that approach. I think that'll be something that we can obviously take a look at. We need to kind of mold going forward. I think, and you identified here, I think it is important to have these items documented. If we're going to adopt a policy like that, the devil's in the details, really, because searching, I know, can be a little bit tricky because some people can complain that there were only a few singled out, only people who fit this description or that description. And also, the idea of if we have a policy saying it is permitted to do it versus it is required to do it, because we'd have to talk about staffing and other things. So, but until we kind of get that initial first draft, and I do like that combination where we single it out into those categories, the idea that a search of, a fifth grader likely should be conducted perhaps differently than an adult, search of an adult. So I think that would be a great way to start, certainly.
And I'd like to write it so that we have the ability that if in the event something happened or we have a security concern, we're prepared to be able to implement that and do that, right? It's not a, yep, we're gonna require this to be done every, 3 days out of, 8 school days or something like that. But if we need to change our practices or implement something in relation, we're set with the right policy language that allows us to move forward. And one of them, even the Racine one, literally says the Board of Education grants authorization to conduct random or reasonable suspicious screening using these, tools. Those types of things is what we would see in the policy and that authorization for this, and then we get into those very specific pieces below in the ARs.
So, on the last AR that we were just looking at, you said it's not a policy, so technically, if you create the AR attached to the metal detector policy, then we as a board don't have authority over that, correct? Or do we?
We still, as we create them, we still have been bringing them forward to policy committee,
Well,
but you
you
don't
can
need to go through
essentially-
that process.
So-
You're correct, it's different.
I guess the only concern I'd have is that, if we're outlining everything in there as far as steps, then it's not governed by, the board as far as, what we can potentially do. So you want to bring it back to us if you want to make adjustments. I guess I would like to see at least an outline, and the details can be in the AR, it's-
Yep, and I think that, John, what I'm thinking even is the fine line between, like one of them references certain trainings.
Sure.
I'd like our AR to be a little specific, or
Yeah.
even be
And-
specific to this training, this course, whatever that might be. Well, if that course changes and has a new title, I don't wanna have to come back and go
Yeah.
through the process. But maybe there's some very specific things around the process of searching or the protocol for events, let's say, of how we would, pick and randomly pick, right? Like, how do you randomly pick people out so there isn't bias or something like that? Maybe that's more appropriate for the policy, and by bringing both the policy and the AR, if this group finds, hey, we should slide this to the policy versus the AR, that's an easy move after that, but get it on paper first at that point.
And you're asking, just so we've got clear direction, you're asking, get a little more meat in the policy part of it first.
Yeah, and I don't think it's gotta be this, size of Madison's policy. This is huge and very detailed.
Right.
I think we can get enough detail in there though that we have, we have something that we can actually hold people accountable to. The AR, I'm worried that we can get lost and, if we have all the detail in there, then we don't have to hold anybody accountable because there's not a policy to follow. It's an AR, So, obviously this is a non-issue right now because we don't have metal detectors, like we're kind of talking about, so.
Sure.
Well, what's interesting is, there was, it was in the football playoffs, and Franklin canceled spectators for a football game due to a potential threat and kind of how that unraveled. But they made a really difficult decision, and I don't fault them for that. But I always look at what would I have done in that situation? Could I have brought in portable metal detectors? Could I have done that? Now, I don't see anything, I don't think we have to knee-jerk and get me a policy to authorize me that. If I had something specific that I was responding to, I know I could pick up the phone and call the board president and feel empowered to do that. I don't see anything that precludes me from that. I think our community would be understanding if I had to do something. But it was the same thing. It's like, ooh, do I just need an umbrella, even if I don't have that this could happen as a measure of safety. Because again, they're faced with a situation and whether or not
That's
you're
one of them
prepared,
that I
it was just.
investigated for this one because I remember that being
Yeah.
a football person, right? Like, I
Yeah.
remember that. And I think part of that too is in reference to the policy, we have to be very clear, like, if we did that in that case, that may not be our staff. We may have to work with an outside agency or a security company who does that. And if it's partly their contracted services and our people, we can hand over, to John's point, of what's in the policy. This is how we do our business here, so everybody's on the same page as we move forward. Because as we look at some security monitor positions and all that, it's great if I can hire one person, but when they're sick, when they're this, if you work with a service, sometimes, now they're dealing with the filling and all of those types of pieces.
Well, and I think that's an important point to integrate into the policy, that may be, part of how that's these devices may be present, maybe a mix of staff or a service, but that it's authorized use.
I would also see it, to John, one thing that I do see being in the policy is very clear on the notification piece, not just the posting at the event, but the notification of families that we would be doing this, that would become a handbook thing. That is prevalent in all three policies of how that is notified to everybody, that all of a sudden kids just don't show up one day, or a visitor, that now you have to do this to walk in the door.
It's much like how we approach the use of canines, where we embedded that's allowable, here's what it looks like, noticed, and part of our ongoing communication, so.
And my understanding is, since we partner so closely with our local, with all of law enforcement, our local police department, that if one of the sworn liaison officers needs to take someone into custody, whatever their normal procedures are under the law, this does not impair that in any way, shape, or
Yes.
form. That's my understanding.
And they have access now to
Yes,
those
they
materials.
do.
So if
Right.
we had that suspicion and we're conveying suspicion, they as an agency have access right now.
Right.
Yeah,
They have
as
their,
well.
whatever rights they are conferred by
Correct.
state statute. This does not restrict our law enforcement.
Yep, they have
Sworn
both their
officers.
process, and talking with Chief Deering and some of the other officers there, they're gonna use the best search procedure they feel is gonna give them the presence of what they need to solve or what they're looking for, let it be a wand versus, an actual search of the person. And so that would be their rules to follow, however they wanna do that at that point. Nothing would stop them from using a metal detector today to search a child if they had suspicion
Right.
through their processes.
Great.
Any other direction, questions you want us to scout a little bit more as we kind of frame up a draft?
Just last tiny question, my understanding is this would also then apply to, we talked about the use of wands, would also be, I was called the arch, walking
Oh,
through the
sure.
arch, right? That's what this is.
I think we would
designed
write
for.
it so it would be any metal detection, or
Right.
even not even, I don't even know if I'd use the word metal detection.
Right.
There's some different industry language out there that it could be any sort of detection software or system that we would be looking for.
Sure.
Because it might be a wand, it might be an arch, some of them are, I saw,
Islands,
are
or-
just, they're islands, they're, you know, just one standard thing, they're reading so far out. We don't wanna limit ourselves to what we're using or whatever company we might contract with if we need to go that far.
Great.
Yeah, magnetometer.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Certainly
industry
a
language I
market.
learned about.
Certainly a market.
Looks like that's the encompassing.
Yeah, well, I attended a play at the Marcus Center, and you walk through, it's not exactly an arch. It's a little bit closer to probably the scanning mechanisms that you use when you like exit Walmart or something like that.
Mhm.
But apparently it's a metal detector.
I've seen those at high schools.
Yep.
Yeah, so I appreciate the fact that you're looking to be kind of technology agnostic on this, whatever it is. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Other thoughts or feedback? Otherwise,
I
administration.
think that gives
thank you
us enough to start with a draft policy and an AR and come back here.
Thank you for your research on this, appreciate it very much.
Thank you, everybody, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, let's see. And next couple of items actually relate to two of the nepotism policies, 165-2 and 533-2. So we'll take them in order,
Sure.
Superintendent Wimmer, and maybe you can set the stage.
Yep, just so you know, you unpacked this line by line and word by word when we met in August. So we've done the heavy lift on that already. Just to reiterate on the nepotism as it relates to board members, and again, just so much time had gone by, so before it appeared on an agenda, I wanted to at least reorient the policy committee to this is what we had said last time. So the last time we spent, I think, nearly an hour just on this topic, and we really did go through that. So we had talked about having readiness to bring to the full board, when we wanted to bring attention to the concept of influence, to have a shared discussion about that. Board member influence on things. We talked about use of domestic versus designated partners and just getting board input on that, and just sharing our general discussion, kind of what we had gone through to be ready for it to come for the full board. So just because a lot of time has elapsed since our last discussion, before I placed that on the agenda, I just wanted to check back in with policy. So we were ready to, again, there were some tweaks that we were looking at specifically in some of the highlighted colors, but those were kind of our three big things that we wanted to bring forward to the board to weigh in, to have all of their views before we proceeded.
So looking at the electronic packet,
Mm-hmm.
the policy-nepotism board 1 PDF, which is the third attachment, that's one with the green highlighting.
You've got some green, like turquoise.
Right, or the green
Yep.
text, I should
Yep.
say, not highlighting the green text.
So we've got that one, so it is, it's 165.2, we had those sub-points in there. The green was some new in the context of we started nesting some new language into kind of what we had. Because remember, the evolution was go with statute, go with what we have, then we did a kind of new, and then, hey, we want to grab some things from the new but nested in our old. So the majority is our current language that we had. So we were staying more true to that. But those were the three pieces off the last discussion. Like I said, we really talked a lot about the concept of influence. And then there's a key line in there that talks about the ability to act on policy, that you can contribute to that, you can have discussions around that, but, so then would they not be able to act on this one policy? Those were things we wanted to bring forward to the full board for discussion. So again, just kind of reorienting us before we're leaned on in front of the full board to bring this forward as an item to lead that discussion.
So if I remember right, the options that we had were, if the committee had a strong recommendation one way or the other, that we could lean that way. Otherwise, we could bring multiple options to the board, talk about pros and cons. I'm not sure if the members here have a thought, just to reiterate, the one with the green text, that's our current with some additional definition around.
Correct, the green would be
definition
new
of
language.
Mhm.
And then the strike-throughs are, we use school board instead of Board of Education, and green would be new. So you can see it kind of nested
Mhm.
within our language.
And the other option that we have is leave it the way it was.
You can,
Mhm.
which, you know, we said you can remove and lean on statute, you can leave it the way it was, but I think that the committee worked long and hard on trying to get what we had with some little tweaks, and we were comfortable last time we met to kind of bring that forward, but it's certainly an option for you. Again, it's just been a lot of time and space, so however the committee feels that they would like to proceed is what I would want to honor.
Sure. Is there any strong preferences from the committee with these, you know, the various versions, or,
And what I can do for the board, because it would be even more time and space from the time they visited, I can do a little kind of history around here's how it evolved, here are the discussions, here are the questions, and here's how the committees attempted to resolve those. And then we needed your input on those, because there were just some key points where we said, hey, we don't want to speak for the whole board, but we're ready to take it forward, was our last conversation. So I can do a little bit more of a, kind of, here's the evolution of it for the board.
that might not be a bad option. You know, I think if I remember right, just to kind of set the stage, my personal opinion, the original policy isn't bad, but there are some things in there that it looks like go a bit beyond statute, and there was some question as to whether or not that was forcible, or that it could move that far. So I think that, we talk about kind of what's the ill, or what was the reason maybe that we were focusing on it. That was one of my
Right.
recollections. I think here in the version that's got the green text, we did additional definition around immediate family member and lineal descendants and such, but really left the rest of the policy largely intact. It might make sense if we're going to give an update, if you will, to the board around if we think there are changes to be made around what you had said, which is kind of the journey, and here are the options.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I reviewed the entire committee just to make sure, because like I said, a lot of time and space, so watched it to take notes, and that's, the committee was ready and just saying, okay, we're to the point where we don't want to just speak on behalf of the board, we wanted to engage the full board in that. So I'm happy to bring that forward and give, like I said, in this instance, a little bit more of that history and that evolution, and just a couple of the pieces we wanted them to weigh in on specifically. Without questions, and Chris and I would plan to put that on a future agenda along with the other pieces that we've talked about.
Sure, with the idea for additional input. Okay.
The same thing with that next item, if I may. It was just centering and disaggregating the nuance between employee and board member around the concept. So we had very little pieces. We just were going to be adding a line that this would be included in the employee handbook, and that we would update that. So August, we talked about it striking the at the time of adoption, because there was no one any longer impacted by this. So we didn't need that phrase, and that we would include a statement in it that this will be included in the employee handbook. So that, you know, even outside of our tenure, that piece would always go forward in that, and then the employee handbook would be updated even this year once action was taken. So a little less dialogue around this one certainly, but ready to move it forward as well.
To bring that for additional board inputs at that point?
I think that's ready to go with those two tweaks that we had referenced last time, that we could go first reading.
Thoughts, questions, concerns?
I thought we had something for cousins, because there's aunt and uncle in here.
Is it the five employee version?
Either, both of them, neither one of them have it in there. I thought we did, or we had mentioned, I thought there was something mentioned.
Want me to go back through the history and see, John, kind of wrote the outcome? I know I watched the most recent one, which was where we unpacked it. Maybe that was a prior conversation. I can double check and pull some of the transcripts from that and see, and get back to you. on that.
I think that got left, I think that got removed because of the lineal descent discussion.
Oh, that,
Because cousins wouldn't technically be a lineal descent, that would be a lateral descent. Lineal would be aunt and uncle because they're directly above you, but cousin would be their direct, not yours. And then, you know, I mean, that's, I think, the downside of expanding specifically beyond family member. I mean, I think you have to define family member, which is fine, but I mean, I think that's the concern is then, you know, you have to start getting into cousins, second cousins, you know, first cousin once removed, you know, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, I think the intent of the policy needs to be the thing we focus on, that's clearly stating what we're trying to avoid, in my understanding of reading the policies, is inappropriate influence over decisions that directly benefit someone you have a relationship with.
Especially, and
I mean, that's,
Having a closer circle.
and
you're
those are already in place, you know, again, you could do nothing with any of the policy, and you still have those pieces in place. You don't have the authority to hire, fire,
right, we don't.
be the
do
direct
those things.
supervisor of,
The
again.
the employee one makes more sense. I think the employee one makes,
It's cleaner,
it's
it's
more,
easier.
it's, well, and it's more likely to occur because there's a lot more interdepartmental, you
Tons.
know, supervision amongst employees.
Mhm.
You know, people get promoted to department heads and stuff like that, but from a board standpoint, we hire one person,
Mhm.
you know, and the decisions that we make, I mean, I think, again, the spirit of the policy is such that you would remove yourself, or recuse yourself from decisions that directly impact you,
Mhm.
you know, so if there's a carve out, I'll just use myself as the example, if there's a carve out in there for, you know, my spouse, you know, for some reason, like her specific section of something, then I would just recuse myself
Mhm.
from that decision. I mean, that's the spirit of the policy.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's my take on the nepotism policy in a nutshell, is I think we understand the spirit of it. How specific, I'm fine if John, you know, if you want to get more specific with cousins and stuff, that doesn't bother me. But I think it's just so inclusive at that point then, you know, I think we're starting to get pretty tangential from family, from
We
direct
can
lineal
surface
family
that.
members.
What I can do is talk, I'll go back and review the history. I agree, I think it, you know, prior iteration kind of started morphing into the descendant categories, so I can confirm that. And I can just surface that when we talk about the evolution of these policies. This was something that was in and was, you know, shifted to that, but we're open to your feedback and ask the board. I think that would be fine. I think this was just one that, you know, we just were kind of getting it ready for the next layer of dialogue with the full board.
I mean, there'd be a good overarching discussion, you know, for both of the policies around how far does it extend?
Mhm.
You know, there's a fancy diagram with all the descendants and things. You know,
Yeah.
The diagram of what is it, consanguinity? the
Yes.
whole thing? Yes,
Yes,
we could
it
include
is.
that and say, this is the circle that we've drawn. You could always draw a bigger circle. The thing like Chad's saying, that the danger is sometimes, I'm not sure if someone's my fourth cousin or not. I know it's,
Right.
but where do you draw that circle?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I think
and-
we could
and-
easily,
In what, if there's really even if you just have a professional relationship with someone and they're not family,
Mhm.
I still think it would be appropriate to recuse yourself in that. Like people have done, you work
Yeah.
for West Bend, you've removed yourself professionally, I recuse myself from the medical discussions, when you're
Right.
selecting. You know, I mean, I think the spirit of the policy is laid out well.
Mhm.
So, but I'm comfortable with it. I mean, I don't have a strong feeling on it one way or the other.
what we
as far
could
as how
do
much-
easily, because of all the work that's gone into this one, is leave these two for a discussion item versus a first formal reading.
Oh, that's
So
good.
that gives us that ability then to do any kind of tweaks, and then it's ready to go through its process for adoption. We could easily do that
Why
with
don't you
these
do
two. Because again, it's a little bit different with that history, that story,
Mhm.
a little more dialogue.
Mhm.
So I think that would be well received by your fellow board members.
Great. Why don't we do that? We'll position for a discussion item then. and
Perfect,
get initial feedback, and then we can move it forward as the board wishes.
great.
Okay.
The next two I've printed and had at your seats, just because I think it might be easier to look at together. So when you look at the 870 public complaints, that is using updated legal. Do you have yours?
Oh, different. Maybe I stole
Steal
yours.
two? You might have.
Did I stack two of them? I don't think I did. Oh, I think this is just one. This is just one.
Oh,
Spot.
Sorry.
I was like, what,
I
do you
got
want, do you
I
have
got
one?
Okay.
Where did everyone get these packets from? Okay.
nothing?
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
I,
what- no
maybe,
treats- no
maybe
treats
I
for
was
you.
sitting
Oh,
on
is
that.
your book on top of it, Jen?
Yeah, use those. Thank you, John. I had them. Give me those
I
back.
did see her lay out three, that's.
I just,
Thank you,
yeah,
John,
what
for
are the
that.
chances it was directly on top of it?
So the reason why I'm having you is because you might want to look at them side by side. We had a lot of discussion prior around navigating complaints, all throughout the organization. So 872, the one that directly follows, is our current policy. So there might be parts of the current that we like and we want to integrate to the updated legal language. There might be parts we want to strike. So I thought it was just best to look at side by side on those. And then we also wanted to focus on then how do we, some of our discussion earlier, why we put this one back on was, okay, what if a complaint is about a board member too? So those were some of the pieces that led to us prioritizing putting this back on our docket for review.
Wait, so we are moving from 872 to 870?
So 870 is the recommended updated legal language. It's labeled as 870.
So this would be what WASB would recommend.
Yep, WASB recommended.
That's
And
one
this
they've
is
done.
our old policy.
872, yep, 872 is our current, that's been around for quite a while.
Well,
Since the 80s in some form or fashion. So we might want parts of it that get integrated, we might do it just the inverse,
I mean,
however we
just-
want to tackle it.
just off the top, I do like that we are, we're being a little bit more uniform by using the school board instead of the Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the second paragraph in 870, it says the board revised. I mean, I don't know if we need to be more specific there.
Okay.
I'd say the school board.
Sure,
I mean,
you can
is
easily.
there another board? Probably
Right.
not.
Oh, sure.
But, I don't.
Yeah,
know
why
for-
change?
Mhm.
So in WASB's, you can see, I've got kind of in all caps there for consideration and a sample rule. So WASB provides both a template for policy language as well as sample rule, knowing that we sometimes like to integrate those pieces into our policy. I kind of put it all there. So, like I said, just feedback on pieces we like from our old that we want to make sure we keep.
Right. So one of the things that I noticed, if I'm reading this correctly, is, so the citizen complaints policy 872. So it starts by talking about citizen complaints, but then in the middle of the first page, it says superintendent is responsible to the Board of Education for these functions. Citizen complaints shall be identified as being one of the following categories. So it has a number of categories, which as an accountant I like this flow chart. But is that necessary? I don't see the new one that way. So my question for administration would be, has it been administratively beneficial to treat these differently, because that increases the length of of the policy, and if it's like, we don't need it that granular, then why inject all that detail?
I don't need it that granular, it's just that and again, this has been around in the 80s, they seem to carve out some exceptions. And that's why they were bracketing them, is that they had exceptions to things. So again,
Say the general policy, and then it's almost like an insurance policy, where you have the
Yeah.
general coverage and then you have the exclusions afterwards.
yeah, that's the only reason. So I don't find it necessary, when someone brings me a complaint, like, hey, I've got a concern, a complaint, great, let me help you with that process.
Right,
And I don't need to map it to a bucket, per se.
okay.
I'm just taking that in and trying to get to resolution and
Just
file
wanna-
that complaint, but
Just want to confirm that we aren't losing something, but I didn't see that, but
no, you just would want to key in our current policy. Are there certain things that you want to carry forward? Again, it's spelling out some exceptions, it's spelling out some things. And then we wanted to dig in, because one of the things that we do need to clean up is we shouldn't be going into closed session around a board complaint. That should be something that's shifted, so.
Well, One thing I see right off the bat is our current policy on the, I believe it's probably, well, step 2, immediate supervisor. You know, it starts right there at the bottom there. Then you go to the third page, says 10 business days following the meeting unless additional. So we actually lay out a timeline of when we should do it. We don't have anything like that in the new WASB one.
Okay.
And I think,
Would you like to see
I
a
think that'd
timeline
be
for resolution?
beneficial, just to kind of keep the process honest, you know?
Mhm.
So we're not dragging things out for people. If there's a legitimate complaint out there, I don't want someone waiting a month for a response and,
Sure.
you know, something to get resolved. I think it's,
We've had no
10 days is
concerns about
adequate.
current policy timeline. I would just carry that over then and look at it.
I mean, I don't know if we've been able to maintain that, if that's a
Mhm.
adequate time for,
I've not run into any issues in my 4 years with the timeline associated.
and I don't know if anybody complains about it, if it's a little longer. I mean, obviously, there's gonna be circumstances, and this lays it out. If more additional time is needed for gathering information, you know, that's a legitimate reason to extend it. But, I mean, you know, somebody who's looking at this can expect a resolution or something, some kind of communication within 10 days, I would assume,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Well, maybe it's a good opportunity to double check with administration around, we don't think there's a problem with the timelines, you know, maybe they've input, but then if, I agree, John, it makes sense to put proposed timelines back in if we could.
That's an easy.
Yeah, on the board, and it says within 30 days, the Board of Education review, the board will to determine, you know, whether to hold a hearing or not. So, you know, I like that timeline situation in there. I think it just lays it out a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, it's well said. I think it speaks to what we just did with the AR on Title IX, having that timeline and some of the steps in there.
So on the WASB proposed policy, first page, almost dead center, it's a paragraph that begins, while staff members are expected, et cetera, et cetera. The last sentence talks about if there are complaints of misconduct by the district administrator, we should instead be submitted in writing to the school board president. I have zero problem with that. I think that's appropriate. Wonder if we need to get some sort of instructions. Is that an email thing? Is it they have to mail it? You know, what, you know, I don't know if there needs to be additional guidance around a little tip or hint around what does
Sure.
that mean?
Sure, I don't think you'd want to restrict that.
Agreed.
However, they, you know, if they could choose to drop it off in writing on your behalf, I can say they can be received here in writing, and the address, as well as the email, which can be found, or contact, I can put the administrative assistant as a
Exactly.
contact to do that, so I can flesh that out a little
Yes,
bit.
no, you got, that addresses my question, because otherwise someone would say, well, I'd like to maybe write it, but do I drop it off at the administrative offices where the superintendent is?
Right,
Right, so I think if we just guide them on the path, that might be helpful.
So, with that said, so this kind of lays out submitting complaints and talks about administration stuff, but it doesn't really lay out if the president gets the complaint.
Both
Do we
of them
need
do this.
anything like, is there
Oh.
something in here I'm missing?
oh, that the
You-
president needs to
You
follow
know,
that
'cause
same
like, this goes
process.
about public complaint, this goes about, you know, there's other pieces in here that kind of follows a little process here, or some steps.
Yeah, so he has to execute on the same process to bring resolution to a
Okay.
complaint. Like you said, that's not
Yeah.
clear. I'll make sure and get,
Implied, or,
no, I think I'll make that more clear easily, yep.
Yeah, that'd be good to perhaps, you know, have your
I mean,
view
'cause-
on if you follow that flow chart, because many of these, it's a good point, many of these talk about, oh, it'll go to staff, and then it'll go,
Mhm.
right.
and we just need to kind of pressure test to see if that's the correct path.
I mean, you can assume you would take the
Sure.
same path the administration side would do, but
Yeah,
Just
no,
need
to your
next-
point.
the
Pressure
next
test it.
board might not, you know, they're not
Mhm.
part of this conversation
Mhm.
also.
So go ahead. Do you want to chat?
One thing, I'm just finishing the policy reading here, in the last paragraph, complaints not resolved at the district administrator level may be appealed to the board. Appeals to the board shall be made in writing and presented to the board through the district administrator. So I don't like that, because if it's not resolved by the district administrator, then I don't want them to be the ones responsible for bringing the complaint to the board. I think there should be another path to get to go directly to the board.
So are you
Is that you? Are they talking about, is
I
that
assume-
referring
Yeah,
to
yeah,
you?
superintendent,
Yeah, so if there's a complaint that you are not resolving, or it's not resolved to their satisfaction because of you,
Mhm.
then it seems like that would not be a very confidence ensuring.
So you might be
Flow.
unpacking two things. I might not, it might not be about me at all, but we
Correct.
can't get to resolution, and I might be saying, hey, our next step is this. I actually might be shepherding that
Correct.
process.
Yep.
Complaining about me failing to resolve something is a complaint about me that goes to the president.
Right, so that, and I just
So
wanted
it's
to.
just not
Because
clear.
complaints that you can't resolve, totally agree, you
Yep.
should bring it to the board, that's not an
Yeah.
issue. It would be more as if they are unsatisfied with the fact that you just didn't resolve the
Right.
issue.
Then that's a complaint about me versus,
Right, so I just want
Should not
to
be.
clarify as
just,
two
it's just
differences.
not clear in this paragraph.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a great point. So kind of like we were talking about before on pressure testing, and taking
Mhm.
that scenario through, saying, oh, boy, that would be a little awkward maybe for
Right.
you
Yeah.
having to bring to the board, hey, there was a complaint lodged against me, and okay, and maybe that's.
It's not, it's
straightforward,
just-
but we have to, what does that look like?
And
Yeah.
the perception to the person with the complaint, like, oh, the person I'm complaining about is the one that's responsible for telling
Right.
you I'm
You-
complaining
yeah.
about them.
It's-
That just doesn't seem like it's a good way to do it.
Like you said though, but this is, and you need better narrative around it, this is if we haven't reached resolution, and I'm shepherding that through,
Yep.
like,
What's the next step?
here's what we do, and then I bring
Yeah,
it to
that's
the
a
committee, yeah.
different.
To that point, does the president get notification of a complaint along with the administration?
Not every complaint, no.
I mean, is that unrealistic to say, to add that into there, so there's a second person that knows about it, that can maybe keep the process moving, or keep tabs on it if something happens, because he might not care about most of them, but when it comes to an administration side, he'll have the authority to, to kind of follow up with it, or say something, or.
I like what you're saying about a fail-safe in that regard. I don't know that I would want it to go to a direct person in that scenario. That's just email overload potentially.
Right.
But maybe just that it's logged in another location that can be accessed, so that your complaint might go, a complaint about someone might come to you, but then that complaint is also registered in a log that is accessible with times.
John, to your point about the kind of cross-check, we have that internally, so if it's about a person,
Mhm.
it's going to Lenny, and then I'm the backup, and I'm managing and responding that we're getting to resolution.
figured it
You might
goes
be doing
to
that.
more
If
than
it's
one
about a
person.
student, it's going to Emily as the preliminary, and then I'm shepherding that, and I'm that accountability. And then it comes to me, if we're not resolving at that level, then it comes to me, then it's looking at that. Sometimes you as board members receive complaints, and you're very skilled and adept at saying, hey, let me connect you to the superintendent and all that, and then usually I'll circle back and say, resolved, or here's where we're at in that. So if you were the one that, sometimes they include you in pieces, we might be updating you individually or bringing awareness to all that kind of thing. So maybe something more administratively. I've got faith in my team that we've got those, but maybe sketching something out around that, so we ensure that the system runs that way.
The other reason why that might not be a great idea is because anything that goes to Chris in this example in writing through his email is public record. And so certainly complaints about the board should be in public record, but if it's a private complaint about an employee from an employee that hasn't been vetted yet, I don't know that the best place until it's been vetted, that a public
don't
record
want-
would be the best place for that to be accessible. It has been vetted, we don't even know the outcome is, but now this email exists that could be pulled at any time, that they can just review and be like, oh, someone's filing a complaint against so-and-so, even though there's no vetting of it yet.
And most of our, any kind of our issues are really resolved very quickly. That, people will call in, like, I'm struggling with this, and they don't want to make a formal complaint. They just want help with the process to get towards resolution, so we might be dispatching ourselves in some way.
How many formal complaints do you think you get in a year? Formal complaints, not like, hey, I'm upset about this, but like, I'm
very
submitting
rare.
in writing this complaint that I want addressed.
Very
Less
rare.
than 10,
Absolutely.
less than 5.
Probably less than 5.
So
Probably less than 5.
I would imagine it, having that's what I like about this policy as I was reading compared to the other one, is I actually like that this one really just directs it's mostly a smooth flow, an overview flow of, here's who to contact with these certain complaints. It's not necessarily, here's how we're gonna manage every one of these complaints. It's more like, this is the person that we need to get you in touch with to address this complaint. And then there's a process for escalating that complaint if it's not addressed. To me, that seems appropriate and not overly complicated. I feel like you can trip yourself. I was reading through this with some of the exceptions, and then it's referring you to all other different policies throughout, well, this refers back to policy 751, and this one refers, it's like, the whole point we were trying to, that's why we separated nepotism out even, was because we wanted to put the board part in the board section, and the employee part in the employee section. So to me, the complaints, this keeps it a lot more streamlined in my opinion, and I don't think it sacrifices quality of getting the complaints addressed.
So from a procedural standpoint, if someone does a more formal complaint, I mean, I'm assuming that, it's logged and there is a process and flow chart or whatever in place around that.
So when you're dealing with that, there's an investigative component where we're legally trained annually, or every other year. Like I said, it's generally Emily, Lenny, myself, and where we're leading up a formal investigation of a complaint on something. That's very, very rare. It's really just generally, and when people are looking this up, right, they're frustrated, and it's like, well, I need help with something, so they're reaching out. I don't want to bury them with something. I want to get them routed to, because most often it's like, hey, I'm frustrated with this, can you help me? So we were dealing with, we deal with traffic a lot. Like, I've been an intermediary between the sheriff's office and law enforcement, helping a parent around their intersect. Like, I don't control this part, but I will help you with resolution on this, to keep that kind of alive and getting through that. So it might not even be in our organization. It might just be something, here's how we can help you. So making it clear how to get connected with someone to do that, getting kind of some of the timelines and the checks and balances around how we talk about resolution, and then really cleaning up that last paragraph around if you don't feel like you've reached resolution, the nuance between those and then my different role, and how to get those to the board in some way, and that commitment around those.
When we come back with another draft, that'll give us some additional time to kind of contemplate these other
Yeah.
items, but I think I thought too that this was cleaner, it was more streamlined, easier to understand.
And it might be because it really, if we're gonna have a couple as discussion items, it might be a nice discussion item for the board, just,
Sure.
hey, we'd like you to look at this and share any feedback. I can certainly foreshadow that in an update and say, hey, we're gonna make a little space, because we're looking to do some deep work on these pieces, and here were our initial thoughts, and give them space for additions, so that we really, as we kind of reframe something, it feels in attention to multiple perspectives.
So this is, as it relates to the public complaints or the citizen complaints, because I was remembering Board Policy 187, when I was read that admonition, if you will, talks about, we encourage you to use citizen complaints can be done this way, employee complaints can be done a different way.
Correct.
So this does not touch or affect the employee complaints.
Right. Right, there's that process. And then really getting at, because in here, there's some language around elected officials in our current, starting with 4 and 5. So we just need to unpack that around, if a complaint's around a board member, and what do we want to say or do.
Could we, does it make any sense to pull that out of those separate policy in the 100s?
You can. Absolutely,
It's
it
just,
would.
if I'm looking, that seems, if your complaint is about a board member,
It's probably not running through the HR department.
Yeah, it seems like maybe putting that in the 100s, how do you file a complaint against a board member?
Right.
101.
Well, it might be a nice piece of education, because I don't think people realize that so often board members only have collective authority. They don't really have individual authority, and so a lot of, outside of the scope of sitting in this room and your work, you're regular citizens like everyone else, and you have those rights. So it might be, like you said, a nice preamble to put together around, here's our board, here's that, in the scope of their duties, which is all we can oversee
Right.
here, and to tighten that up.
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to having that separated out and put into the 100s potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's a huge deal either way, but it seems almost cleaner if it's
I think it makes
in the
sense.
100s.
And as I said, it might allow us with that clean policy to reiterate, board members still are citizens, what's the scope of their authority?
Sure.
What is that
Yeah.
and what's our, because sometimes the way this is written, like I can't do anything
Well,
about.
right, a
this.
complaint about a board member wouldn't make sense to go to Lenny or something like that.
Correct.
That wouldn't be,
Right.
so maybe it is actually cleaner to separate that out into the 100s, like we did with the nepotism one.
Yeah,
That might make more sense.
I think it does, and maybe a process where that's one where, like you said, it's really the board president and, unless it's about the board president,
Then it's the vice president.
you know what I mean, then to the vice president, where you're navigating that together and you've got some mutual awareness that
Yeah,
you're getting
because
towards
I'm
resolution.
comfortable with the transparency of the policy and everything that's written
Mm-hmm.
in there. I don't have a problem with the policy, I just think it would be cleaner in the 100s because it seems like a completely different process than if we're complaining about a staff member or district employee, because we are not really district employees.
I mean, that
in the
does-
same sense.
That does smack of belonging in the board operations
Right.
with 100 series.
Right,
It
that's,
really does, yeah.
that's where I was thinking it would maybe be a
Yeah.
cleaner fit.
Yeah, and as I look through, the process that's outlined here, and I don't have an argument with it either, it does make sense because it seems like that is a responsibility of the board president, just like, whoever's chairing the meeting has a responsibility around public appearance.
Mhm.
Yes, maybe we lend a little bit, on our administrative friends, but otherwise, really, when you look at this, the only thing that's really outside of the board per se is the complaint, depending on where it gets to, could be forwarded to district legal counsel for review.
Yeah, you have
But
very
really-
limited authority.
Yeah, but really, it doesn't sound like, nor I don't think the intent of this is that, okay, we're just gonna, if there's a complaint, all right, I'm just gonna delegate it off to administration. Wrong. I mean,
Right.
It should be a board.
That should rest,
Right.
that should rest.
I think that the number 5 is relatively cleanly written. I just think it should be in the 100s. That would be my suggestion for discussion.
Great, I'll add the same kind of things around timeline, things that would be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I would carry over for consistency's purpose, and I'll knock that up for the team to review then before we move it forward.
Does WASB have, is board mentioned in public complaint in this proposed 870? I don't know that I saw it.
Yeah, that's part of what got me, as I was
Yeah.
comparing policy to policy, I'm like, this doesn't really address a board complaint, which makes me think, in their mind, it's not part of the.
Correct.
It's not really part of this policy, which is
Yeah.
why I thought maybe it shouldn't be part of ours either, maybe it should be in the 100s.
But we do have stuff on the board duty and, responsibilities in the board section of the policy.
In the
So,
section
we do
100s.
have stuff that does, I would say, speak to some of this.
Oh, as it relates to like
But I mean,
board
yes,
member
it's
conduct
not-
or ethics or that kind of thing, for
Yeah,
instance?
it's not, I guess it's not laid out as far as a complaint,
Yeah.
direction.
Do you want me to go through, kind of with that in mind, John? Do you want me to go through that 100 series, grab some of that language about expectations?
I mean, I'm fine, like, with Dr. Timus said, I mean,
Yeah,
adding
just
the
limit it.
board complaint
Click
section
out.
just to clarify it, but I don't know, I don't know if, I don't know how much, we're gonna be a little bit, I guess we're gonna kind of be a little bit redundant with some of the
Well,
language in here.
It's nice to have the conduct laid out, because I think that may help if people look and say, well, I don't like what that person did and I'm gonna complain, and they read the conduct and they see, oh, well, I guess I'm just not happy with their opinion, it's not really a conduct issue, or they didn't act outside of their responsibility, I just didn't like what they said, or I don't like how they did
Because I
that.
believe we do have a code of conduct portion of the board.
In the 100s.
So you're saying you would add,
I would add
It's a
leave the code
process.
of conduct where it is, and I would add this as, if you wish to file a complaint against a board member.
or maybe we can just add this to the code of conduct.
Possibly.
You could, I would
Would that be
label it, I would
clear?
just label it separate, so if people want to go on our policies and file a complaint, if they're like, I really wanna file a complaint against a board member, they should be able to see it easily. Like, which section is complaint, here it is, how to file a complaint on a board member.
You could
I mean,
cross-reference it.
I think,
But
from transparency standpoint, it's
But
good
at
for accountability.
at that point, don't you think they'd probably first go right to the code of conduct and see if they broke a rule?
Generally, first, they just pick up the phone.
Yeah, I was gonna
They're not
say, most
reading
people aren't
policy
probably
to do it.
reading policy first, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
they
it's-
really aren't,
it's
but I
really-
use policy to guide those conversations. I do pull those out and use those
Yeah.
as reference, but majority it's,
Yeah, and
they're wondering, you know, like, well, what about this? You know, they're very good at, you know, give us a call or reach out in some way, and we kind of unpack that, and I use policy
Yeah.
to guide that discussion.
yeah, I'm comfortable either, I don't necessarily care where it gets put in the 100s, I just think it definitely looks like it's meant to be in the 100s, especially since it's sort of excluded from the WASB policy.
Why don't I frame it up? And what, if it were separate, what would it be coded, where would it kind of fall in the lineup, using the coding system? And then I'll do just a quick revisit of the 100s around here, some sample spots where we could either nest it or cross-reference. I'll just do that, look through it with that lens, and all the 100s.
Yeah, at first pass, I agree, I don't have a challenge issue problem with the language.
Yeah.
I am just curious if WASB has one on this, and if they do,
Something
great,
that
if they
needs-
don't,
yeah.
that's okay too.
Many don't, because when we were talking about how we were dealing with it in our current, I have consulted with them in the past. They recommended that we get it to kind of a point where locally we wanted to see something, and then they can step in and help us frame. So I think I've got some good direction from the board to knock something up and talk through some nuances, or maybe what they've seen in the field and could contribute to us.
And just the last thing, I mean, page 5, do we need to retain anything in this section? The board considers complaint and special, you know, talks about the meeting, you know, the meeting that we potentially have on a complaint.
If,
I mean, we don't, there's nothing regarding that in the new, I don't know if we need to retain it or if it's not, you know.
Well, that's because this one's specific to the board, so I'm comfortable, I would be comfortable retaining it, I just think it should be.
Adding it to the board one.
Board one,
Yeah.
yeah.
That'd be fine.
I'll ask the legal then, hey, if we're considering keeping this language,
Mhm.
what recommendations do you have for revision? Because again, it's a foundation of language from the 80s,
Yeah.
so they might recommend something. So,
We could go into, I just want to clarify, for closed sessions, for a staff complaint, we could go into a closed session, correct?
You-
Not for a board
you-
complaint, a staff
correct.
complaint. So that's, to me, the only
Employment
reason
related.
why it clearly shouldn't be in the same policy then, because we can do a closed session for a staff complaint, we would specifically
Mhm.
stated we would do an open session for a board complaint.
Right.
So they should definitely be separate policies.
though it is, you raise an interesting point though, in this last paragraph, it talks about the complainant, even, this is in the board complaint, the complainant will be able to have a person of his or her choice accompany him as an advocate or witness pursuant to legal applicability under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. I'm just curious, I am not familiar with this act. I'm just curious if that's language that we need, want, or desire in the policy as a whole. Like, what about a non-board member complaint?
that would need to be updated, I would say.
Okay.
So when we say we're interested in retaining something in the spirit of this, they'll probably clean that right up.
Okay, Just-
Because it'll have an intersection of other
It's gonna be
rules and
statute.
things, so,
right.
yeah.
I did, yeah.
So,
Sometimes there are those required
Right.
disclosures, and I
Right.
wasn't sure if it fit that bill.
no. So what I can do is, like I said, I'll map that up, I'll go through the 100s again, make some recommendations, I'll bring that back with the draft, having legal put their eyes on both ends of it, kind of what you wanted to see.
Great.
Mocking up something, so this will come back to committee first.
See some more.
Great,
Okay, for discussion.
yeah.
That takes us to TIF review, I believe, relations to tax incremental finance.
Yep, TIF was one of the outstanding ones. This is, again, kind of been on the books for a long while. We had talked about what TIFs or TIDs, tax incremental districts. So it's usually a TID, and how those are created. We went through all the whys and how they are, and you've even seen, we've updated you, we sit on those panels. So one of my tasks was to go forward to see who's got anything on the books, is there a template, is there anything legal, there's not. We talked about having, and you don't necessarily need it in policy, we're not opposed to it. You have an obligation to have a seat at the table, that's usually superintendent or designee, it's me or a business person. Those are the ones who are doing it in the district, right? We're sitting on that. We'll sit on it for the creation and the annual meetings around all of them. So we go to Jackson, we go to West Bend, and they'll give us the report. Andy Sarno just went to the Jackson one, and get like, hey, we had an update on their performance, here's that. They host those meetings, those are public, we just have a seat at that table. on those, but we do cast a vote on the creation of one, when you do that. So when we create them, we're usually in consultation with, you know, or alerting the board. Just like when they were taking that little sliver off Badger when they were widening that road, like that was something, hey, they're interested in creating this, here's where you can find all the here's all the documents associated, here's that. And then we'd have a conversation, either board president or full board, around how is the district representing in that vote.
So we just kind of walk through it a little bit, because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that first of all, I have no problem with you or another member of your team representing us. Just fundamentally, if whoever it is says, let's set one of these up, right? I'm gonna draw a boundary, all the properties in this boundary, we're gonna put it into this. We just walk through fundamentally, there could be some things in the interests of, in the best interest of the school district as well, and some things that are not in the district's interest. Maybe you can walk through some
Sure.
examples.
So things that are generally in best interest of districts, because again, you're creating kind of a safe harbor around taxes. You're holding them
It's like
at
it's
the
like
request, and we receive taxes. Everyone at the table is, you know, has a vested interest in that. So you're deferring that, right? I'm saying I'm holding this at this lower value, and we're okay with that. So anytime we do that, we're deferring money from the district. However, as you said, sometimes it's of benefit. In a state where everyone in the state's facing, you know, declining enrollment or things like that, and we have a very buildable, maybe they're incentivizing, you know, housing developments and things like that. So they just had one drawn around to urge family development in Jackson, as well as some industry. You're bringing people to your community, that's gonna grow the district, so that could be a benefit to the district.
Yeah, and that's, no, go ahead.
Sometimes they can be contentious. So in my last district, we had a couple where big developers were coming in and putting up like high rises, you know, and there was massive community meetings around that, or around what they wanted to see, not see, certainly a lot of emotion there. So then the board is often, you know, I'm going to those community meetings, I'm representing the board, this is what's going on with this, here's this, and then the board is saying in those instances, here's where we believe. So we're managing those as they go. We have not had any
Yeah.
like that here.
Right, and I don't make these statements or ask these questions because I'm artificially pro or, it's all situation by situation
It's
basis.
very situational.
And that was gonna be my point, that if there's one that's very controversial, there are avenues, usually these don't spring up and you
No.
have to, you know, meet in a day. It's a matter of, okay, let's talk this through if we need to, so there's
Yep.
opportunity for discussion. if we
City or
need to.
village has the obligation to hold that as an accessible meeting, giving notice, doing all those. We're just a seat at that table. But again, when they're of that nature, they're generally public forums for that. So we would go to that, I'd be sending notes to the full board, like, here is a public forum, here is the sentiment, here's this, and then we would get that advice. So, but again, we haven't had anything like that in the communities we serve. We've had established ones, some perform better than the others. All those reports are available through the different cities, villages,
So-
around their performance. And sometimes we get checks cut when one closes early and they, you know, cut the check and do that, so.
Right. So I appreciate the background, because with that, when we look at this policy, it's not a matter of we can artificially say, you know, in policy, you will always vote yes or you always vote no. These are the factors that that we say that really
Yeah.
the administrator or designee should be considering, correct?
And this language doesn't necessarily represent that. It seems to be, like I said, kind of on a foundation of being old. If the board would like to continue to have a policy, which not many do, then I would want to totally rewrite it to be reflective of that actual, and it would be kind of a wide avenue that we know they exist. It's our obligation to serve, you know, and be mindful as a steward for our district and community, that kind of thing. And here's some of the things, but it's,
Yeah, my first question was, is it a requirement or a good idea that we have a policy that says the superintendent will be our normal default designee for TIF? That's one piece. Because after that, these criteria, I mean, they're nice to mention, but they don't really give you any, it doesn't give you any lift,
no.
really.
It's
So why would we,
superintendent or designee,
okay,
because again, it's generally the just business or superintendent in any district who does that. We just kind of trade off.
yeah, I'm not sure if that's
But-
something that legally requires a policy to have, to say
No.
we hereby, okay, so that's probably a creature out of.
They invite, they'll send me because they know Andy and I, they send them to both of us, and Andy and I go, which one do you have, which one do I have? I'm generally primary and he's backup.
The only place that I would see value in, I don't think it needs to be a policy, I really don't, but I think, you know, it might be something if we're gonna keep it somewhere, would be more in the contract, the superintendent's contract or job description is like one of the responsibilities of like assigning a designee to represent at TIF meetings. That would be it, just like, you know, you could pick
Yeah.
you could pick Andy, but, I mean, just so that we're aware and represented at those, but I don't think it has to be a policy the board oversees.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not gonna reprimand you for a decision, you know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
not, I just don't see that being a thing.
In the corporate world, we would create a resolution saying it's resolved that you or your designee are, so that you can take that around to say, yep, I'm
I'm the
authorized to be,
one.
and if we don't like it at any time, we can
I'm
revoke it.
automatically the one that,
Yeah, that you're
Yeah.
the default, so,
and that's what I said,
I don't
and maybe it's that clean, and again, it's no, never mind to us, so you can easily have one that just says superintendent or designee will represent the district in these matters, you know?
And I would just word it as part of the superintendent's responsibilities would be to assign a designee.
Right.
That's how simple I would have it.
mhm.
I wouldn't put any criteria in there what their obligation is to say when they're there, because I mean.
You can't
can't
know.
create-
You can't
Yeah,
know.
you can't know every
Situation,
situation.
Any, what do you think?
No, I mean, so we're talking about getting rid of this.
It's not
Or
necessary.
trimming.
Or just making it a one sentence thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't even know if this would be an issue anywhere. I don't think, you know, I don't think it would because of state statute regarding, I hate to say a nepotism issue,
Mhm.
but there's not really a way for somebody to benefit, like if you knew the people that you were or going to talk about this, with, you know,
Mhm.
you can say yes or no or whatever, and there's nothing you can do with it, so.
Right,
That'd be the only thing is, you know, no one's gonna benefit off of this somehow, it's just,
yeah.
it's all for the school board to.
Well, That's a fair point. I mean, I think just generally speaking, let's say it was, I'm making this up, your brother who is building the skyscraper that is gonna be, right, normally, I would assume.
He's building skyscrapers, I'm not working. I should be at home.
That normally for something like that, you say, well,
Right.
I mean, just even from optics, that's a
Andy's the
refusal.
designee. Yeah, it's the same thing around you guys recusing yourself, we're figuring out
Right.
who needs to be at the
And-
Kind of
table.
auto build. but-
And there's legitimate law in state statute
Right.
when it goes to
Yeah.
that, when it gets to that level.
Yeah.
You know, that handles that, so
Right.
I guess I wouldn't be opposed to, if you don't think we need it, it's very small anyways, there's not a whole lot in there, and it's something that has to get
No,
done.
what I
And
can
it
do
probably
is-
last occurred in 2014.
Right. What I can do is just double check on roles and responsibilities for me and clean up that, you know, that there's a piece around representation or designating that and the expectation of communication
Yeah,
with your board.
that seems a
On
more
that, you
appropriate
would-
place
you
for
would-
this,
you
to
would-
be honest.
You want, as a board, so, you know, that's how I operate. You want the next person in the seat to also operate that same way, where you as a board are feeling informed and engaged and all of that. That's our job, so I'll double check that piece for that
Yeah.
cleanup.
So just out of curiosity with how this works, so you mentioned other elected or public officials that come to these. So for instance, I'm not picking on anyone in particular, like the city administrator for West Bend, would they have a voting seat? at this?
They're there, the people, the taxing authorities who vote are certainly them. Marine Park is the other educational institution that
Yeah,
I
so-
went. So we're the two educational institutions
Got it.
around that. UW sometimes would have a seat at the table, you know, it's just depending where, but those are generally the three.
I only ask that because it seems that this is purposefully, if you will, constructed that it's not that it's the council people or the school board members who are there. It really is the appointed
No, it's
officials
correct.
of the various
Yeah,
municipal, or in this case, school bodies.
yeah, it's not the elected persons,
Right.
it's the
Right.
reps of the organization. We're informing and we take our direction from our boards, from our
Sure.
councils, from our, you know, we're acting in that interest.
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought to then, or conclusory thought, I suppose, is strike it, and like you said, find a different spot, maybe divest the responsibility and just keep it
Yeah.
simple.
And like I said, the responsibility for, representation, either myself or another, but also I would put in there about the obligations to communicate and make sure your board's informed. You would want that in there too.
In this scenario, do we need to, since we're technically removing a policy, make it an action item on the board?
We do, because removal has to
Yeah,
go
you still-
through.
So I would,
Move for removal, or advance it for
Yeah.
removal.
my proposal would
Yeah.
be to advance it to removal as an action for removal with
Mhm.
replacing, with making sure it's delineated in responsibilities.
I'll work with
Sure.
Lenny to
Okay.
make sure we revise that, we can include that. So you can see that it's coming together.
I'm trying to remember the policy on policies, I love that. When we talk about removal, I think that,
Second
that
reading,
it requires
unanimous.
at least a first reading and then come back, so it
Yep.
could be done in two.
It could
Okay.
be done in two,
It could be done in two.
if
Okay.
unanimous.
Okay. Any challenges with that? Okay, well, if we have second thoughts, we have the opportunity
Yeah,
to come
you
back to
did
the
it
board,
right.
at least
Why
twice.
don't I get that responsibilities language, mock that up for you too?
Great.
So that you can see that as part of it.
Okay,
Great.
good discussion, who'd have thought tips were,
Tips are exciting.
they are exciting. All right, we've reached the end of our planned agenda, unless there's anything else that we've missed here. All right.
No.
Any objections to adjourning? I hear none. Thank you, it is 5:17 PM and we are adjourned. Thank you.